Hi, welcome to my third video on the Rust programming language. In the last video, we learned about variables in Rust. In this video, we will take a look at functions. First of all, what's a function? A function is a reusable set of instructions designed to perform a specific task. Typically, a function accepts some inputs known as arguments. Then it executes the defined instructions and finally returns some result. Now let's see how we can create and use functions in Rust. We can define functions using the fn keyword. Each function has an unique identifier which we can use to execute this particular function. Let's call this function getCuboidVolume. Now, after the identifier, we need to put a pair of brackets. We will define the arguments for our function inside these brackets. But for now, we can leave it empty. Then, we also need to put a pair of curly braces. We will write the logic for our function inside these curly braces. This piece of code which defines the function name and its arguments is called a function signature. If you look closely, this code might look a bit familiar. That's because we created a main function in the first video. We know that the main function is the entry point of our program. Okay, now let's get back to writing our function. As you might have guessed, we need to find the volume of a cuboid. We know that the volume of a cuboid is calculated by multiplying the length, breadth and height of the cuboid together. Let's write this formula in Rust. First, we will create three variables, L, B and H, and set them to the length, breadth and height of the cuboid. I will set L to 128, B to 46 and H to 11. Then we will create a variable named volume and set it to the product of the length, breadth and height like this. Now we have found the volume of a cuboid. Let's print it out using the println macro. If we now run our program, nothing will happen. That's because even though we have defined this function, we haven't executed it. To execute this function, we have to invoke it from the main function. To call this function, we first have to type in the function identifier. In our case, this is getCuboidVolume. Next, we need to put a pair of brackets like this. This will call our function, which in turn will print the volume of our cuboid. Next, let's try running our program using cargo run. It will print the volume of our cuboid in the terminal. Okay, now we have created a function that calculates and prints the volume of a cuboid. But there's one slight problem. If we want to calculate the size of a different cuboid, we have to duplicate this function and manually change the values of the variables. Obviously, this isn't that intuitive. We can solve this by passing in the size of the cuboid as arguments to this function. Then we can call this function as many times as we want with different dimensions. To define the arguments, we have to type in each argument inside the brackets separated by commas. So to define an argument for the length, type in L, which is the name of the argument. Then we also need to define the type of the argument. I will set the type to I32. Now we can repeat this for the remaining two arguments, B and H. One thing to note is that the order of the arguments matter. So when we call this function, we need to pass in the arguments in the same order that we define them. Then we can delete these let statements since we are now passing in the dimensions as arguments. Now let's go back to the main function and pass in the arguments when we call our function. Inside the brackets, we need to type our values, quite similar to how we define the arguments. I will pass in the length as 172, the breadth as 36 and the height as 8. Now let's go back to the terminal and run our project. It will output 49,536, which is the volume of our cuboid. Great! Now we can call our function with different dimensions and print out the result. But sometimes we want to get the result and do some more calculations on it. We can do that by returning the result. First, we need to tell the compiler what type we want to return. To specify the output type, put a dash and then a right angle bracket just before the starting curly brace, like this. Then specify the type, which in our case will be I32. Next, at the end of the function, we can use the return keyword and specify the variable we want to return. We can also remove the println statement since it's no longer required. Rust also provides one very useful feature. We can return the output without using the return keyword. To do that, first remove the let statement, keeping only the formula. Then we need to remove the semicolon at the end. This will automatically return the value of our calculation. Now we can return the value from our function. Next, we need to go back to the main function, and instead of just calling this function, we will create a variable to hold the return value. I will call it volume. Then we need to put an equal sign and call our function. What this will do is it will call the function, get the return value, and then set this variable to the return value. Now we can print it out using the println macro like this. If we run this code, it will print out the volume of our cuboid. That's all about functions. In the next video, we will take a look at control flow statements in Rust. Thanks for watching.